Good morning, Gamecock fans. Today is Thursday, February 13th, the year of our Lord 2025, and this is Coffee with J.C. Sherbert. Hope everyone is doing well. If you were one of the hardy souls that went to the men's basketball game last night, I applaud you and salute you. Um, it, it's just hard to take at this point. It's unbelievable some of the things that happen at the end of games to this team when they're close and some of the play on the court when they're not close. I don't know how you can have a point guard when you turn it over as much as they do, and they didn't turn it over as much last night, but they did in critical situations toward the end. I don't know how you can have a point guard that misses 10 shots a game when you're turning it over 24 times, an average of, I mean, that's and very few assists. I don't know, your best player at the end of the game loses the ball, misses a bunny. It's a tough year, and 0-11 is not pretty. That's a terrible record in the SEC, and it looks like another year where not really another year because Lamont Paris's first year they did have another good moment beating Kentucky up in Lexington. That's always special. In addition to beating Clemson and knocking the Tigers, for all intents and purposes, out of the NCAA tournament, but there's just not much to hang your hat on here, folks, and it's tough. I've never seen a season like this in the history of Carolina athletics, where they're playing. Like in football, the closest thing I could come to in my mind is '86. That team finished 3-6-2, but they took Nebraska to the wire and lost. They played Georgia down to the wire and lost. They did get thumped by Miami. They got a big lead on Florida State and ended up losing. They tied Clemson because they missed a field goal. They tied Virginia Tech because they missed a field goal. Outside of the first two games that season where they lost to Vinny Testaverde in Miami in the opener 34-14, and then lost to a bad Virginia team on the road 30-20, you know, that team could have been a winning team and kind of set the stage for the next year. Todd Ellis was a freshman. They just kind of unveiled the run and shoot and Joe Lee Dunn's defense. I mean, you could feel, oh, they're close. And in basketball and college sports in general, as transient as it is, close, I don't know that you can build on that. This is not like this is a young team. Um, and unlike that year, which I think gave a lot of people hope because of the young talent, this is just snatching the soul out of everybody. I mean, I made a little comment about hardy souls at the men's basketball game. It's apparent that the public has sort of written this team off, and I don't blame you. I'm not gonna, people may say what they want, and it like sometimes I've talked about the need to reseat the Colonial Life Arena to where it looks better on TV, but there was no getting around it last night. I mean, and it's tough. I don't know how much more, if you're a hardcore Gamecock basketball fan and go to every game, and I salute you for that. If I were in Columbia, I'd probably do the same. I like going to basketball games, especially Colonial Life Arena. It's a comfortable place to watch a game. I salute you. I mean, and it has to hurt to see a team snatch defeat from the jaws of victory time and time again, and they just don't perform down the stretch well, in addition to everything else they do that's detrimental during the course of a game. I credit the Heart for coming back down 13. You come back, you snatch the lead, but as soon as they got the lead, folks, it was weird. I was just like, well, they're about to give it up. Sure enough, that Ole Miss player that came back in, um, what's his name? Anyway, Mia, was that his name? He uh, he ended up killing him last night. I mean, when you leave him wide open at the top for the three, I mean, that's not a bad deal. I don't think, because I don't know that he was the best sharpshooter around. And he just drills it over and over again. He made play after play. They Ole Miss is a tough team. They're a battling team. So again, I credit the heart and the desire to go. I mean, that Ole Miss clearly better than the Gamecocks. Dia, Dia, not Mia. Malik Dia, 18 points, 2 for 3 from 3-point land. Was a stud in just 21 minutes. Junior from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He's only averaging 9.9, 5.6 boards. But he is, shooting 28% from three. And last night lit the Gamecocks up. It's just things like that over and over again. And it's hard, folks. I think it's just hard to kind of, sit there and take that. Ole Miss is a team, too, that's been a popular destination, no matter who the coach has been for recruits around Columbia. So, yeah, who knows? Who knows? I just it's one of those things. Former Gamecock Javon Benson's on that roster. Of course, he didn't do much. South Carolina, I think he played in 16 games, but and then went to Hampton, played better, and then back at Ole Miss. But it's tough, and the big picture, it's harder. It's hard to even with this program. It's a lot different than football, baseball, even women's basketball, which did have some winning in its past. South Carolina's big winning, consistent winning is way in its past, and it was a completely different era of college basketball. It would be like going back to the 50s in football. You can't live off that. It's a different game. It's a different way you recruit. It's different players. I mean, it's just a different deal. And since Frank McGuire in that era, back in before I was born, he was still the coach when I was born, but he's about 4 years away from retiring. There's been no consistency, and that hurts you. I mean, you can have a Final Four year. You can have a year where you win 26 games and are the surprise of the league, and your coach wins SEC Coach of the Year. You can go to the tournament back to back, but if you don't at least sustain, and every program in the SEC sort of go, even Kentucky, they go up and down sometimes. Florida was down for a while. Now Florida's back up, but you've got to be up more than you're down to get the momentum, I think, to be attractive to the players that you can go, pay out of the portal. And they've categorically failed in doing that. And the crazy thing about it is that so 4-point loss last night. That's now 21 points in 6 games, which is not a lot in basketball. That's a made 3 or a missed 3 or 2 or 3 less turnovers, however you want to skin it, away from having 6 league wins and being not on the bubble, on the right side of the bubble. And that just is a tough pill to swallow, especially when you consider there are abnormal things happening with this team, as far as all the turnovers go and the missed shots and the choking, for lack of a better term, in clutch situations. I know that they're probably very frustrated in the basketball offices, the players. You could see it in Colin Murray Bull's face last night. Here we go again. So anyway, I'm not going to talk about basketball a whole lot today. I just wanted to remind everybody, if you went to bed, turned it off last night, 72-68, the Ole Miss Rebels, the I guess 19th ranked team in the country, they get by the Gamecocks at Colonial Life Arena. So who knows what the future will hold. If I'm Lamont Paris, there's just something so crazy about this team. The chemistry, it's not the chemistry necessarily, because I don't think you don't have players not trying. You just have players making huge mistakes at bad times, and so I mean, it's not, they're not a bad bunch of people. They're not. I think sometimes they're very selfish basketball players in bad moments, but just like last night, you just think I don't know. So it's one of those things. But I don't know what needs to happen this offseason. My 10,000 foot view of it is Lamont Paris, you're probably going to lose some players in the portal, no matter who that is. You just go ahead and take it. And some guys probably do need to move on. And then I think Lamont Paris and his staff need to focus on the types of players that led them to the wins they had last year, i.e., you are not going. I mean, everybody talked all year. Well, they're going to be much more athletic and all that. You're not going to out athlete anybody in this league right now at South Carolina. I'm just telling you. If you can, fine, great. I'm fired up for you. But this is not like football. I mean, where you can get athletes. It's better to go. It's better to zig in basketball at South Carolina than to zag, and we saw that last year. There wasn't a team that passed the ball and ran offense and was just hard to beat, harder to beat than South Carolina. I mean, so, look, why does Rick Barnes has players at Tennessee, but why did he win when he didn't? Because he has a style, and then Lamont Paris had a style. It's the old Wisconsin stuff that they were doing last year, not identical. And yeah, they ran into some trouble with Auburn and probably could have used a little more athleticism, rim protectors, whatever. But you know, like I said, I mean, you got point guards that are out of control. You got, I mean, I want to say shout out Jacoby Wright. He played better last night, but it's a mess. It's a mess. So want to start off with that, but we're gonna go to our primary topic. We're preparing to fire the primary weapon. Remember that from Independence Day? The late, great Robert Loggia in Independence Day. Give me the Secretary of Defense. Then wake him. I love that line. Independence Day is one of my guilty pleasures. The first one, the sequel, just completely bleh. And it was beyond that Will Smith wasn't in it. Was not in it. It was just beyond all that. I was just stupid. But those folks that make those movies, they make disaster movies too. It's Roland Emmerich. Is that it? Some of their stuff is really good the first time. It's like, yeah, don't make a sequel. So anyway, Georgia, Ray Charles. I want to talk about recruiting in the state of Georgia. We started on this yesterday, and I want to kind of expand on it because, Georgia recruiting over there has evolved a bit through time, but one thing's remained true. It's always going to be an important state for the University of South Carolina. There are the Gamecocks. The Palmetto State shares a border with Georgia. It's important for Clemson too. It's important for the University of Georgia. There's a ton of players. There's great football in that state, both in and outside of Atlanta. There's a bunch of people that live there. It's a football state. North Carolina. There's good football in North Carolina, but it's also a basketball state. People like hoops because of the Tar Heels and Tobacco Road and ACC and all that. Georgia 100% football. It's not that they don't have good basketball players come out of Georgia, because they absolutely do, especially around Atlanta. But it's a football state. There's good coaches. The high schools over there invest. They did a good thing in Georgia a while back with their lottery. They were ahead of South Carolina on that. And teacher salaries tend to creep up, which means coaching salaries tend to creep up. And they just, the communities, the cities, the suburbs, they all love it. So that's why it's good to recruit in Georgia. It's become a clear top four state as far as, and there's not, they've lapped Ohio, which is also a good state for recruiting. I've mentioned that they feed the whole Big Ten and Pac-12 or Big Ten and MAC and all that good stuff. But Georgia used to be behind Ohio. It's now ahead clearly, and it's knocking on the door with Florida, and has a lot less people. There's more SEC players that come from Georgia than Florida, at least as far as data that I read 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know, with the transfer portal and everything, you may get another state. Who knows? Texas may be up there by now with the expansion and stuff. But Georgia is a hotbed. Everybody recruits Atlanta. Remember, they had the snowstorm a couple of years ago, and everybody got stuck on 285. And it was during recruiting. Massive coaches from everywhere were recruiting it because you can fly in, fly out. The airport, Hartsfield Jackson, is the busiest airport, they say, in the country or the world. and there's usually a flight to Atlanta. You can get in and out from most places, including some of these small college towns. So everybody recruits there. Everybody wants to get a leg up there. There's a massive amount of prospects every single cycle. And historically, South Carolina has gotten some of the best players in program history from Georgia. Sterling Sharpe, who just became the first Gamecock in the college or Pro Football Hall of Fame. Connor Shaw, who some consider the GOAT. I do, as far as quarterbacks go, winningest of all time. Flowery Branch, Georgia, Georgia family. Um, you go through George Rogers won the Heisman. How did I pause before I mentioned him? He's from Duluth, Georgia. Mike, recently you've had Mike, in the Spurrier era, Mike Davis was from Georgia. Jared Cook was from Georgia. Kenny McKinley, the late Kenny McKinley was from Georgia. There, Blake Mitchell, who was a quarterback at South Carolina, early Spurriers from Georgia. I can't believe I have to qualify Blake Mitchell, but hell, it's been 20 years. So, you know, most of you hopefully know who Blake Mitchell is, but we do have a younger crowd. So sometimes Blake Mitchell, who was Spurrier's first quarterback at South Carolina, was from LaGrange, Georgia. He was a Lou Holtz recruit. But through the years, South Carolina's kind of had to optimize its strategy a bit in the state. And the two legendary coaches that were at Carolina, Coach Holtz, Lou Holtz, and Steve Spurrier, one of the things their staffs did that wasn't, that I thought was a mistake. Looking back, it clearly was. Lou Holtz early, they went out and recruited Georgia. They got guys like John Strickland. I mentioned they got Blake Mitchell out of LaGrange later, but that was, they weren't a lot of guys that they got. By the end, they kind of dried up because I remember writing and thinking one of the things Steve Spurrier and his staff need to do is go recruit Georgia again. I think there was one year where they kind of got Addison Williams, and that was it. Addison's a good coach now, but it was it looked like it dried up, and I was like, well, I don't know what's going on, But Spurrier comes in, and Holtz did have Kenny McKinley committed, so they inherited McKinley, and he came and of course set records as a receiver. They got Jared Cook, out of Peachtree Ridge, or no, sorry, North Gwinnett, over there. And Jared Cook played in the NFL for forever and was a big part of all that. So they got players. By the time Spurrier ended, so with Holtz, it sort of dried up. By the time Spurrier ended, it was almost a flooding of the market. And a lot of these guys ended up not being all that good. Um, Chaz Elder was a player they got that was kind of a highly rated guy from Georgia, and he didn't really pan out. They got a list of guys from Stevenson when they took Mike Davis, who was really good, that didn't pan out. So I don't want to say there was dead weight. It's mean, and these guys busted their ass, right? But there was a lot of they needed to fine tune it. So enter Will Muschamp. I thought he did a great job of focusing on who's good in Georgia that we can get, and it wasn't 100%, but you did have guys like DJ Wanham, JJ Enigbare, they got out of Georgia. JC Horn, of course, was a first rounder. They did a fantastic job, I thought, of getting in there and just kind of focusing on that next tier. Now, what I mean, JC, please don't get into tiers today. TIER. Not talking about men's basketball, right? TEAR. But you looked at it, and I thought that they would not sign like 10 guys. They're like 5 or 6, and they kind of honed it in, and it makes sense. Will Muschamp was from Georgia. Brian McClendon coached at Georgia. Lance Thompson, those guys have recruited Georgia. Bobby Bentley could recruit Georgia. I mean, being at Auburn, he was familiar with it. It just it made sense, kind of that they would be better at that, having the knowledge of the state that they do. And man, they got some players. I mean, I'm going to go through this right now. since the 2020 draft, DJ Wanham got drafted. Uh, he's still playing. The next year, J.C. Horn, and DJ was from Stevenson High School. Uh, and his brother Dylan Wanham was from Tucker and ended up playing a long time for the Gamecocks. Did not get drafted, but was a pretty standard guy, as far as playing and starting. And he unfortunately had some back injuries and stuff, but still a really good player for the Gamecocks. In 2021, J.C. Horn was a top 10 pick, first round pick, highest rated defensive player taken in the draft for the Panthers. He's from Alpharetta. Of course, the Gamecocks flipped him from Tennessee. Ernest Jones, they beat, this was a great evaluation from down in Ware County. They went and beat Duke on him. Duke, there's a little secret for you. Duke sometimes is pretty sneaky with their evaluations. Ernest was a really good player at South Carolina, got drafted and started on a Super Bowl winning team. 2022 rolls along. Enigbare goes to the Packers. He was one of the players they beat Georgia on, and there was a quote somewhere that Kirby Smart said that they wish they would have signed him. He's for Hapeville Charter in Atlanta. And then, one of the best camp evals during that era was Kevin Harris from the Bradwell Institute in Hinesville, Coastal Georgia. And Coastal Georgia is a place South Carolina should recruit well. Savannah, on down through like Ware County, where Ernest Jones came from. That up 95, you can get to Columbia pretty easily. Probably easier than Athens because you're kind of taking some back roads going straight up like that. It is a dog stronghold. There are more dogs on the coast of Georgia than Gamecocks are, obviously. And then down closer to Florida, there's Gators. But it's a good place to go recruiting. So, you're sitting there since 2020, this decade. Carolina's had 5 Georgia products drafted. They've sort of beaten Georgia on one of them. Beat nobody. Beat the service academies on Kevin Harris. They beat Duke on Ernest Jones. They did flip J.C. Horn from Tennessee, but their opinions were mixed on him, which I didn't understand. 24/7 Sports had him as a high 3-star, but Georgia did not go on him. And then DJ Wanham was committed to Indiana. So of those guys, really, they won the battle for Enigbare, who ended up being a low 4-star prospect, wasn't really highly rated. And I only say that because Kirby Smart mentioned it after the fact, according to somebody. That's probably secondhand information. But it would make sense because he would have been a good fit for them. The rest of them were just kind of eval guys. But I would even say that this collection of Muschamp guys, a lot of them were like what I would call tier 2B or tier 3, because you didn't really have to beat the world on them. And, I thought that, and they did win some other tier 2 recruit. I mentioned Dylan Wanham. The Gamecocks beat LSU on him. These are just the guys that were drafted. So when Muschamp departs, Jamie Robinson, who ended up transferring to Florida State, another example. He's in the NFL. He got drafted, but he was a Georgia kid. So they did a good job kind of shrinking the board, targeting the guys they could get, and bringing good talent. Now, so enter Shane Beamer, who was at the University of Georgia, who recruited Georgia for the Gamecocks during the Spurrier era. But you sort of were like, well, are they going to be able to find the guys from down there? Is it, it's been kind of a up and down history. When you talk about recruiting in that very important state, are they going to get the right guys? I mean, those were all legit questions. Not that I ever thought Beamer would not be able to recruit lights out, but you have an important part of your talent base over there. And boy, they've done even better than I thought. Even better than I thought. So I look at the players they've brought in. Not going to go all the way back to 2021, but the last 3 classes, including this one, and I'll go over them. They don't bat 1,000. You got some guys that transfer out, obviously, but in that next tier. And what do I mean by tier 2? I will explain that here in a second, because I got to start doing this because you folks that listen on podcast, It's really probably ridiculous when you're sitting there driving and I'm in the middle of a sentence and whatever ad that 24/7 Sports streams to you guys, because that's where we roll the podcast version through. And we're required to put ad breaks in, and I'm just in the middle of talking. All of a sudden, it's like, hey, come to Midas. So we're gonna have a hard break here on, and those of you watching on YouTube, just chill with me for a second. I'm gonna pause for about a second, and then podcast ads will play, and then we'll come back and I'll explain what I mean by the tiers and how Beamer and staff have done that and what they're looking at for the 2026 class. All right, so my face was frozen for a minute there on the on the video version, but did want to tell you about encapsulate, encapsulate USA.com. That's the magic mushroom supplement I've been taking. That's why I'm bright-eyed, bushy-tailed every morning to come in here for you guys. It's good for brain health, fatigue, battling. When you get older, that's the case. Mike Morgan is a believer as well. And they are a sponsor of coffee, JC and Morgan, a lot of things. EncapsulateUSA.com. If you use code JCM, JC Morgan, you'll get $10 off your first order, plus free shipping over $60. Trust me, folks, they work for me. Everybody's body chemistry, disclaimer, everybody's body chemistry is different. Maybe some things that work for other people don't work for me. But hey, don't you want to just give it a try? And you support me here on Coffee and JC and Morgan and the show and Chief Sports and everything else. It'll be awesome. EncapsulateUSA.com. So tier 2, what does that mean? All right, so tier 1 in Georgia, in my opinion, it's not rankings. It's not 4-star, 5-star, this kind of thing. I rated Cam Hayward a 5-star prospect out of high school. I was right about that too. I caught a lot of crap. Um, and he was from Atlanta, and Georgia didn't want him. And there's some other schools that recruited the South that weren't real fired up about him. He went to Ohio State. That was kind of before Ohio State was this recruiting juggernaut in the South, and ended up being, him, you know, Craig Ironhead Hayward's son. All Big Ten, I think, at Ohio State, NFL player. But he would have been tier 2. It's not necessarily where you're ranked because the evaluators, in theory, and should be, while they consider offer lists, and when you have a bunch of who's offers that are legit, like Dylan Stewart, that should help your ranking. But it's not, sometimes you'll, like I did with Craig Hayward, I threw him up there, because I believed in him. So it's not always that. So tier 1 means like, okay, so who are you trying to beat in Georgia on this kid? You got to start with Georgia. Because if UGA has shrunk their board, I talked about this yesterday, in state, Mark Richt used to probably go about 15 to 18 deep in the state. Kirby Smart's probably more like 9 to 11 on a good year. And these are not hard and fast. These fluctuate up and down. And so there's this cluster of players that under Rick would have probably gotten Georgia offers. And I think that hurt Rick sometimes because there were some years where their talent was down and you looked and you saw, well, they had the third-rate recruiting class, and you go through the bus list, and the bus list is long. So, you had, and I was wrong because I thought, what's Kirby Smart doing? I was like, you're the school, no offense to Tech, in one of these states, you can get just about anybody you want. Unless Alabama comes in and beats you, and they do, or did, occasionally Auburn. But, so why are you going to Arizona to get a corner? Why are you doing this? Well, now, dumb me. This is why I don't work in personnel, right? What they did was they fine-tuned it. I talked about South Carolina fine-tuning their Georgia board. Because Georgia, the one thing about it, it's a great state for recruiting. But the one thing about it is you can get in trouble and bust. There are busts. We have busts out of Georgia. It's not, it's probably a lower percentage hit rate than a lot of other states. And it's, you say it's probably because there are players that are closer to their ceiling because the development on the high school level is so good. Everybody's got a weight room. Everybody's got a program. So you have players that are closer to their ceiling, and then if they don't go beyond that, or you project them to go beyond that, and they just are what they are, other people are going to pass them. You know, that's A. And then B, there's just a lot of them, and there's a lot of recruiting activity. I mentioned it because of Atlanta, so you can get kind of coaches don't tend to look at offer who else is offered. They do ask though. I know that for a fact. Don't let them tell you that we don't even pay attention who else is offered. No, you do because you got to know who to beat, right? Who else is in on it? Uh, and you can get some offer lists that are kind of fool's gold, just to be straight. Not saying they're lying, but schools come into the state, they'll throw out blanket offers. So it's fundamentally easier as a Georgia prospect to get 20 offers than it is as a South Carolina prospect. And it doesn't matter where you are in Georgia, even in South Georgia. South Georgia's a little lower than Atlanta, but that's just how it is. So, I was wrong about Kirby Smart doing that because what they do then is they go and say, who are the best players in the country? Who do we like around the country? And you put them in order and you go after them. And that's made their bust rate talent wise pretty low. I mean, a guy like Damon Wilson who left is going to Missouri. He left and they had some issues with the D. His dad wanted more stats and he's at Missouri and cashed the check or whatever. He's from Venice, Florida, but he was better than in their eyes, the Georgia kid. And they were right. He was a really good player. So so what does that do? Well, that opens up about 4 or 5 guys, 4 to 7 dudes every year that throws them in that tier 2 because tier 1's Georgia. It's Alabama under Saban. It's Clemson when they were rolling under Dabo. It's Ohio State. It's Notre Dame. Although Notre Dame got a 3-star O tackle out of the northern Atlanta suburbs that started every game, and they missed him in the championship game because he got hurt. True freshman, offensive tackle. Wow. So, that tier's so sweet if you can evaluate it right. And you can sign the right guys because Auburn, located basically in West Georgia, it's about 20 miles over the border. They've made a living recruiting guys like that. Atlanta, LaGrange. I mean, Auburn's they got remember Tank Bigsby right across the border there for Auburn. When they've been good, you look at their roster and it's probably like a third Alabama, a third South Georgia, and then they go into Florida, and they've always recruited that way. So Auburn's built it up that way. Florida's had players good. Tennessee has come into Georgia and gotten players. And it's that tier. It's not necessarily going head to head with the mighty Bulldogs and beating them on an in-state kid, though that can happen at times if your program's up there. But realistically, that's not going to happen all the time. It's not going to happen what I would call frequently, just because of the way Georgia's program is. Let's just give them credit. I mean, it's not like Athens is a terrible place to go to school, and it's not popular with your classmates. I mean, South Carolina through the years has lost 2 legacy players, Oscar Delp and currently, and then Christian Robinson back in the day to Georgia because they grew up in Georgia and wanted to play for Georgia. So there you go. That's that. Now, anybody else outside of Georgia, Alabama under Saban, the bluest of the blue bloods. Southern Cal comes in there and gets players now. They've got a guy that used to be at Georgia Tech that's kind of their lead recruiter. You should be able to win your share of battles against the Tennessees, the Floridas, the Auburns of the world. And South Carolina used to not be able to beat Auburn. They could not beat Auburn on a player from Georgia to save their lives. I'll never forget Byron Ison, 08 class, I think, offensive lineman from Lovejoy. South Carolina had him committed. He walks out there in South Carolina gear. He's about to announce and then says, just a minute. And then gets on the phone with Auburn and then flips to Auburn. I think he started on that 2010 national championship team. It used to be hard. Well, now it's not, South Carolina's winning battles and getting into that tier 2. And Beamer and his staff have done it more frequently than Muschamp. I mean, so it's been even better. And that surprised me. Not that I thought if they just get equal, because, South Carolina signs about 6 guys out of the state of Georgia every year, 6 to 7, which is a good number for me because they tend to all be quality. There's not a lot of reaches, out there. They They're if even if they're not 4 stars, they've got offer lists. There's something redeeming about them. And you look, class of 2023, DJ Braswell was obviously a player that was rated highly and had speed. Just didn't work out. He's gone, but that was a tier 2 guy that they could make a living on. CJ Adams, another guy, probably more tier 3 given his offer list, but you saw the film and the upside it was there. Those guys are gone. But here are the other guys. Vakari Swain, pretty good player. Beat Colorado on him fundamentally. Jelon Kilgore, who they were in on to start with, and then it ended up being that Oklahoma and Clemson and everybody else wanted him. Pretty good player. Trevon Ball, was an Under Armour All-American out of the Atlanta area. They beat Arkansas on him. Pretty good player. Jatavis Shivers, they flipped him from Vanderbilt, from Villa Rica, Georgia. We saw him play a little last year. He played a little tight end, big athletic kid. During the process where they're flipping him from Vanderbilt because there was a lag, Michigan and Auburn wanted him. So fundamentally, they beat Michigan and Auburn on this kid. And that's 2023. 2024, which is promising. DeBron Gatling's gone. They flipped him from A&M late, and then he hightailed it. But kind of injury year. And sometimes when you flip a guy late like that, I don't know. But he's gone. Wish him the best. But look at these other guys. Michael Smith out of Savannah. Got him in early. Tennessee, Auburn tried to flip him. No dice. Wendell Gregory, same. He's a defensive end now, edge, but same. Jalewis Solomon, flipped him from Auburn. That's never happened, before. He's there, was a backup redshirted this year, probably going to play a lot this year. Matthew Fuller was probably, as far as tiers go, teetering on tier 3. But like everybody told me, if they'd had like late flip, South Carolina would have had a dogfight for him. Running back that will compete for the job. David Bushey was a tier 3 guy, camp eval from Savannah. But we've talked about him on the Big Spur and elsewhere. He played a lot as a freshman, special teams, and he's going to be good. So, look at the 2025 class, the incoming class. And all, so 2 of these guys aren't here, and it's because in Georgia, certain school districts, you can't graduate early. Christian Ingram from Covington Newton, and then Chris Hatfield, 6'4" corner from Lincolnton. Hatfield to me would be a tier 3. They like him because he's a 6'4" defensive back with athleticism. But the others, Damola Ajadome, the offensive tackle from Duluth, stud, flipped him from Georgia Tech late. Xavion Hardy is originally from Georgia. He went to East Mississippi Junior College. It's Kobe Saki-Pra is from Roswell, probably a tier 2, tier 3 guy. Not a lot of, competition for him when he committed. AJ Holloway, bottom tier 2 guy from Buford, inside linebacker. They're excited about him. Christian Ingram, definitely a tier 2 late riser. Again, he's not in yet, 6'6", 295 D tackle. So, 25 has a mix, but you got to, they get about 6 guys from Georgia every single cycle. And you're like, well, that's just 6 guys, JC. They signed what? Bringing 39 new players this year. You're crazy. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because over time, let's say you do lose 1 out of the 6, still over a 5-year period, that's 25 guys. That's more than a fourth of your roster if you're counting 85 as your limit. And so I like the plan. And I think moving into 2026, you've already got Peyton Dyer from Duluth. Now, Georgia's sniffing around. Don't get me wrong. But he's a big corner that's stocked up, had a really good Under Armour camp in Atlanta. Really looked good, really impressive. I think his stock will rise rankings wise. But when you got him, he's kind of tier 2. Will he become tier 1 and be hard as hell to get and keep? Maybe. Carson Baker is technically a tier 1. Georgia's after him, speed back from Atlanta. People talk about Carson Baker's the number one running back on the board. I I think they should probably have backup plans, and I'm sure they do. But they love this guy. They're in the thick of it. They're in the hunt. He loves coming to Carolina and all that. And so there's another one to watch. And at running back, I think they do need to sign some running backs this year from the high school level. And then Ryan Mosley, wide receiver from Carrollton. Now competition's getting thick for him, 6'4", 206. I have a crystal ball in for the Gamecocks. It makes me nervous a little bit because I've talked before about the commitment window when it's like the red zone for commitments, and his red zone, eh, you know. But my guy Clint, who listens to this and the show, put that bug in my ear, and I started researching it, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and do this. But really, really good prospect, 4-star receiver. So those three from Georgia, and there's going to be more that pop up, obviously, but keep an eye on them. They are all from Atlanta-ish. Carrollton's out I-20, sort of western Georgia. So you can check that out. But yeah, in conclusion, South Carolina, I like their Georgia strategy. I think that it as negative sometimes as people think it is, that UGA is right next door, and you got them and Clemson, and you kind of crowded in. And a lot of times national media mentions that when they're talking about this football job. I think that's the same false narrative about North Carolina and Duke being here in basketball. I mean, yeah, sometimes it costs you players, but football's different than basketball, obviously. Uh, but then it's also a situation where I think Carolina's blessed that they have Georgia right next door. And I think you need to look at this. Everybody needs to look at this much more like Oklahoma looks at Texas, right? The University of Oklahoma isn't sitting there going, "Oh my God, we're right next to Texas and Texas A&M." You know, they're looking at being close to Texas as a godsend, especially the Dallas Metroplex, and look how it's paid off. You got to kind of look at it that way. Don't think you're boxed in. Think about look what Oklahoma has done. And the state of South Carolina has probably more talent than the state of Oklahoma on a yearly basis, or at least it should. That's A. And then B, you got big, beautiful North Carolina right above that borders you. You're right. You're close to Florida. You're close to Virginia, D.C., Maryland, up the East Coast. So geographically, all the whole time, everybody, oh, this is a small state, small blip, blip, blip. Well, actually, but it's located, and the guys in the upstate have never complained about it being a small state. It's located in smack dab in the middle of football heaven. I mean, as far as like access to players, what other state borders Oklahoma? Maybe Missouri, but a lot of those guys are actually in Illinois at East St. Louis in that state, or they're up in KC. Oklahoma gets players out of Kansas City. Arkansas, no, Arkansas's got about 10 guys a year. Most of them go to the Hogs. Well, what about West? No, I mean, it's you, and you're kind of attached to Texas. Oklahoma is one of the winningest programs in the history of college football. So, even Tennessee, which annually goes and raids other states, although the talent's getting better, they just they border Georgia and they border North Carolina, and they're killing it in North Carolina right now. But then out west, it's Arkansas, and the west is so far from Knoxville. You do border Alabama. But then up north, you got Kentucky. You got that little piece that borders Missouri, a little piece that borders Virginia. They're not really situated as well as the Gamecocks. So that's my little, hey guys, pep talk for football recruiting. When you hear some of these old narratives, well, it's a small state. It is a small state, but it's growing, and it's not about geography. It's about population. That's why New Jersey isn't a very big state population wise, and they tend to, through the years, have doubled the output of Division I talent. You don't have to be geographically huge. It helps with overcrowding, and that's a different subject. Somebody find me a nice small town to move to when I move back to South. When the wife and I settle in, I've kind of reevaluated some of this stuff, preferably close to Columbia, Batesburg, Leesville, nice, Camden, or that, help me with that, folks. Shoot me an email anytime, jcsherbert@gmail.com with suggestions. All right, so we've gone a little long here on coffee this morning. Don't forget our baseball special opening day tomorrow from 10 to 2. I'll have a coffee for you. Don't worry. It's not going anywhere. And then I'll get on and talk baseball with all of our friends. Probably won't say much. JB and everybody else likes to talk baseball a lot. I'm just here so I don't get fined, right? I want to thank Encapsulate for the sponsorship, encapsulateusa.com. Once again, Magic Mushrooms. Got another sponsor coming on. You folks that like crypto may be interested in it. It's kind of an interesting sponsorship for coffee, but one thing we don't do, we do have to do the podcast version ads, but we're not going to have ad breaks, and it's never going to be coffee's never going to be live. It's just to get your morning started. Gamecock women's basketball plays tonight. I believe 7 p.m. SEC Network. They play the Gators, and then there's a big game Sunday that you guys know about. All righty. I will see you on Inside the Gamecocks, the show later. Going to talk a little Title IX, new ruling, and Rev share, dig into that. Going to dig into a little spring practice. Are they going to abolish spring football practice like that? Going to talk about guys like Chris Hampton, who is a former Gamecock who's out there coaching, and why having former players coaching is number A, it's a new thing for South Carolina. B, it's a good thing for South Carolina. But C, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come back here and coach, and I'll tell you why. And then plus other topics. We'll talk off topic, baseball, all that good stuff. You can catch me here, gosh, in about 2 hours. Well, 2 hours from when I'm recording this. 9:20 Eastern on the Bill King Show out of Nashville, if you catch that one as well. JC Sherbert signing off. This has been Coffee. Holler at you guys soon. Have a great day.